right. So as Sam mentioned, I'm the director of the MIT IBM Watson AI Lab. It's a new industry academic collaboration really devoted to charting the future of AI. Let's see if I have slides. Does anyone know any good jokes? All right. Is this advancing those? Oh, there we go. Okay, audience participation time. Who's heard of artificial intelligence? All right, awesome. Who has somebody in your company who's tasked with figuring out artificial intelligence? Okay, fantastic. So to echo Sam, we're all on the artificial intelligence train, right? Who feels comfortable they know what artificial intelligence really is? Okay, not a lot of hands. We got some hands, that's great. So who's heard of deep learning? All right, that's good, because deep learning is going to eat the world. So this is a Forbes article from 2015. And it's safe to say that machine learning and artificial intelligence are doing things that we thought were impossible just a little while ago. So here's an example of an image captioning task where you can take an image or any kind of media, increasingly videos, and you can produce natural language, beautiful captions of those things. So here, a man in a black shirt is playing a guitar, or a construction worker in an orange safety vest is working on a road. That's an AI that produced that caption. We have basically every game that humans were good at, that they were better than computers, we're basically done. Humans as game players are done. So, you know, from Jeopardy to Go to poker, we even now have systems that we released earlier this year that can debate with humans and hold their own and perhaps even win against humans. So tremendous progress. Even things like art, creativity are starting to become the provenance of AI. And here are examples of art that was produced by AI systems. The problem, though, is that, you know, so I'm a recovering academic. I was a professor at Harvard for many years. This is actually my first job, my first real job. And academics were very uncomfortable with the term AI. So if you're uncomfortable with AI, know that you're not alone. And in particular, we used to like to call it machine learning. And you know, part of the feeling of that was that there's a sense in which there's many things that could be called intelligence, and what we have today, in many ways, doesn't live up to all of them. It's incredibly powerful. But here, when I joined IBM, IBM has a nice framework for thinking about that I just want to share with you, which is this idea of putting an adjective in front of AI and distinguishing what we have today as narrow AI. So it's incredibly powerful, and it's emerging capability. And then meanwhile, you know, when people in the media talk about, you know, AI that's going to take over the world, or Skynet, or all these kinds of things, that's fine. Those are interesting philosophical discussions. And we would call those general AI. And if you look at the bottom of the slide, we have that listed as being, you know, perhaps 2050 and beyond. And when you ask scientists when something's going to happen and they tell you it's 2050 and beyond, that means we have no idea, but it's a long time from now, right? But what I really want to focus on today, and this is, I think, the thing that's relevant for all of our businesses, is this idea of broad AI. So what do we mean by each of these different kinds of AI? So narrow AI today is tremendously powerful, but it's fundamentally limited. So we have single task, single domain. So here we have an example of, you know, if you have many pictures, like pictures of cats and pictures of dogs, or pictures of skin cancer lesions, this is the kind of thing that today's AI, if you have huge data, you can train, you can do quite well. In some cases, you can be superhuman in your accuracy and your speed. Meanwhile, on the other side, what we are calling general AI is this idea of broad autonomy systems that can decide what they want to do on their own. But where we think the real disruption is coming for your businesses in the next 5 years is this area that we call broad AI. So multitask, multi-domain, being able to leverage knowledge from one task and bring it to another. Multimodal, taking in information from lots of different sources, different kinds of sensors, different kinds of media, structured data, unstructured data. It's going to be distributed. It needs to be in the cloud. It also needs to be at the edge on our devices. And it needs to be explainable. You need to understand what it's doing. And really, that's where we see the opportunities lying. So I'm just going to walk you very briefly through these sort of 5 pillars of what we think are really the keys to launching this next revolution in broad AI. So to start, explainability. So I showed you this example of a system that was doing something remarkable. And in many instances in media, you'd like to be able to understand what was previously an opaque data source, an image or a video. And these are great captions. The problem is these systems don't always work. So here's another example of that very same system applied to some data. So this is a man riding a motorcycle on a beach. The system came up with the caption, an airplane is parked at the tarmac at an airport. And in this picture, the AI system captioned this as a group of people standing on top of a beach, which is true, technically speaking. So the problem here is that AI systems, as powerful as they are, oftentimes struggle to give us explanations, and particularly when they fail, it's not always clear why they fail. So one of the things we're working on in the MIT IBM Watson AI Lab is building new generations of explainable AI and debuggers for AI. So this is a big area where we're not only gonna have to deploy AI systems, but we're gonna have to be able to figure out why they work and why they don't work when they don't work. So here's an example of an interface created by a researcher at IBM Cambridge, where he's going through and he's debugging, he's figuring out a translation model where the translation has, an NLP system, a natural language processing system, has made a mistake, and he can walk through and unpack it. So we're increasingly gonna see tooling and tools for explaining how AI works and being able to figure out why it's broken when it's broken. Security. Security is going to be another important area for the future of AI. So one problem that we have is that AI systems can in many cases be easily fooled. So a group at Carnegie Mellon University created these glasses where they took a state-of-the-art face recognition system that could identify the face of a person as well as humans could. But if you wear these very particularly carefully crafted glasses, you can trick the AI system into thinking you're somebody else. So if you wear the glasses on the left, then the system thinks you're Mila Jovovich. If you wear the glasses on the right, then it thinks you're Carson Daly. This is a mistake that no human would make, but it shows just how little we understand some of the fundamental abilities, how these systems, as amazing as they are, actually work. Here's another example that our own team at IBM Research produced, where we had an image captioning system, and the stop sign at the top, the caption the system produced was a red stop sign sitting on the side of the road. Again, this is remarkable that we have AIs that can do this at all in this era, but with just very subtle perturbations of the image. So if you look at those two images, I think we'd all agree they look identical to each other. And yet the image on the bottom has been very subtly manipulated, so the system instead produces the caption, a brown teddy bear laying on top of a bed, with great confidence. So in many ways, our AI systems, as we increasingly turn over decision-making ability to AI systems, we now have to deal with a new kind of hacking that's going to come with these systems. So we're building defenses now to usher in this next era of AI security. Another area is ethics. So as we turn over AI decision-making abilities, decision-making functions to AI, we need to have systems that are unbiased, that are fair, that make reasonable decisions, that can communicate with us in ethical terms. One example of this that's coming up again and again is preventing bias in AI. And this is a case where AI systems will often recapitulate biases that exist in our society. So even though the scientists who build these AI systems don't mean for the systems to be biased, oftentimes if the data they're trained on is biased, they'll then just turn around and give that bias back. So here's an example of loan approvals where an AI system trained on pre-existing loan approvals produced a bias against African Americans. It's more likely to reject loans for African Americans. And we're working on methods to reshape that data to make the systems less biased. Now, these are being deployed in all kinds of different places, including deciding whether an inmate should get parole. So these are very serious issues, and bias creeps in all over every part of our world. Anytime you have data that you need to control and make sure that there are not demographic biases in them, this is going to be a huge area for AI going forward. And then another issue we have is that we need to learn more from small data. So everybody talks about big data, and many of us have big data, but at the same time, a lot of the problems we have in enterprise we're finding are in fact small data. And even when we have big data, oftentimes we lack big labels. So one of the things that AI systems need desperately is not just lots and lots of data, but lots and lots of carefully curated data. And in this case, even if you have lots of data, unless you've had humans carefully annotate all that data, you're not going to be able to get the real leverage out of these systems. And you can see this pretty easily in looking at what neural networks can do and what AI systems can do today. So this is a data set that was created as sort of a toy example just to illustrate just how far behind some of our AI systems are today. This data set's called Clever, and the way this works is you get a picture like this, and then you have to answer a very simple question like how many cubes behind the cylinder are large. And these are the kinds of things that we understand easily and transparently. We don't have to work or think hard to be able to do this. But even our most sophisticated AI methods based on deep learning and neural networks struggle to be able to answer these kinds of questions because there just isn't enough data to train all the different corner cases of this data. And what we're working on in the MIT lab together with Josh Tenenbaum is working on systems that bring together the power of neural networks and deep learning to look at images and understand the images and to understand natural language, but then fusing them with basic logic and symbolic reasoning to basically bring this forward. And we found that by creating these hybrid approaches, which we think are going to be really important going forward, we can get dramatic improvements. In fact, in this data set, we're able to completely solve this problem. So as we move towards genuine understanding of inputs like video and images and text, we're going to increasingly need to include more of that sort of cognitive, logical structure in what we do. And then finally, infrastructure. So by some estimates, by the year 2040, if computing keeps on its current track, we'll exceed the power budget of the planet Earth. There won't be enough energy coming from the sun or stuff we can dig up out of the ground and burn to be able to keep up with our computing habit. And that's even if you leave aside Bitcoin. So one of the other things we're working on that we think is going to be really important in AI is building fundamentally new technologies that can operate perhaps 1,000 times less power. Whether we have it in the cloud or whether we have it in our edge devices, we're working on fundamental new physical methods for doing computing, in this case analog computing, which mimics how our brain works to be able to produce extremely low power, extremely capable AI. So we think this is a journey. AI is going to disrupt many different parts of our industries. And we think particularly as these blockers get knocked down, we're going to see tremendous disruptive potential. And I would encourage you all to treat this as a journey and come along with us as you understand and learn about AI. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
I'm Lisa Weinstein, as Sam mentioned. Lately, I've actually wanted to make the distinction clear that it's Weinstein and not Weinstein for some reasons that are obvious. I'm thrilled to invite Radina Cesari on stage with us. Radina is the founder and managing partner of Glasswing Ventures, making a lot of big decisions around where checks go in terms of investing in companies that are leveraging a lot of the things that David just shared with us. So I'm going to start by asking a couple of questions of Radina and David, and then I'm told we're supposed to open it up because I'm certain that a lot of you have questions for either of these two. So I'll actually start with, as I've been looking in the market, clearly AI is a big thing in venture capital. I've even thought, I run a company called Curiosity. I've often thought it's a publishing business, but if I just put curiosity.ai, maybe I'd be much better off. And so as a VC investor, I'm really interested in how you're able to see, as you look at these businesses, which ones are truly leveraging AI and which ones are kind of riding the wave, if you will, because it's such a popular, term in technology.
Thank you, Lisa. So it's an interesting question, and it's the answer that I'm about to put forth is the answer that I put forth to my LPs and my investors, which is you really need to live and breathe AI, and in this day and age, narrow AI or applied AI, day in and day out, because if I had a penny for every person that added the .ai to their, or every company that added .ai to their name, I would have already retired. Fundamentally, what we look for, so I run Glasswing Ventures. It is an early stage venture fund, 112 million, and we solely invest in companies that take advantage of narrow or applied AI for the enterprise, cybersecurity, and platform markets. And the reason we come at it from that perspective is because fundamentally we believe that in this day and age, any startup that doesn't take advantage of some form of AI, where AI is the what, and the different forms of machine learning, deep learning notwithstanding, is the how. That's, in the layman's term, that's how one can wrap one's head around it. But if you don't do that from day one, you are actually legacy from day one, because fundamentally, as the systems learn, if you're purely software, you're static versus a learning system. But even for us who live and breathe the space, we have constantly wrapping ourselves around talent and people in the various institutions. David and I were just talking about George Tenenbaum, who does very out there research, how does a baby's mind work, and also folks who are very much focused on the applied side of things, because techniques are changing every day. You can arrive at the same model, or at least train the same model with different data sets, and then tomorrow there's a whole new different approach. Right. If GANs were being used for one thing, for voice, now some people are trying to use them for natural language understanding or processing. It's hard to keep up. In fact, I've been in venture now for a decade and a half. In my humble opinion, I've never seen, and I'm curious as to your take, but I've never seen research go faster from academia to industry as we are with the various machine learning techniques around deep learning and beyond, but also in general around AI. So I think we need to live and breathe it. And then it has to solve a problem. Back to your startup question, you will get any meeting you want as a startup with a large enterprise because somebody is tasked with solving the AI question, even though many people don't know what it is. So unlike other startups where you have to work very, very hard to get a meeting, you can get a meeting pretty quickly, but it's a fake indicator of interest.
It's really interesting. So to your point that you've been doing this for a long time, you didn't always focus solely on AI. I think you've invested in other businesses. What has been, to kind of further your line of thought, what has been the impact of AI for a business like yours in the VC space?
So, two answers to that question. In my day-to-day running of the business, I think much like every other industry, we're entering an era where we are a human in the loop, if you will.
Yeah.
So I think if we don't start, at least for my firm, if we don't start consuming our own product, which is leveraging machine learning
Really good point.
over time with humans, because as David said, we're far from machines taking over, then I think we will be putting ourselves out of a business. So the view that I apply to evaluating companies is the view that I apply to evaluating myself. In terms of, if your question was more focused around how are AI startups different than traditional software or even hardware for that matter, startups, I think they are different along a few dimensions. One, team composition. At the end of the day, people still make or break you. Execution matters. And the team composition is no longer just sort of the tech lead and the business lead and typically product oriented and sort of hashing those two dynamics out. You have a third leg to the stool, which is the researcher, machine learning expert, chief data scientist, whatever label you want to give them. And it's created new dynamics in that researchers research for a reason. They tend to be perfectionists, and product leads are going for minimum viable startups, and the CEO is going for when is my cash running out, the board is breathing down one's neck. So how do you balance those dynamics around the perfect versus the minimum viable product? I think that's a very, very different dynamic at play that I haven't seen previously. The other bit is the setup costs, if we want to think of it in that manner, for an AI-enabled startup are higher and longer. And so it is truly unfair and almost short-sighted in my view to compare a little old software company with a little old software company that's leveraging some kind of machine learning capability and having to train the models because it takes a bit more time. Once the models are trained and they're continuously sort of enriching the data set, but the model is there, it's just getting, it's marginal, then I think they will leapfrog everyone else. But up to that point, it requires more time. So how we measure success and failure in the early days requires some knowledge actually of what's taking place within product development.
It's really interesting. It's good to hear that humans do still matter.
Oh, absolutely.
The people in the business. So David, interestingly, that makes me wonder about a comment you made of this is your first real job. In this space, are you seeing more people make the transition from academia to business because it requires such a specific, verticalized knowledge in AI? Is it more so than you would typically see, do you think, in other businesses, software?
I think it's basically an unprecedented privatization of an entire academic field.
Really? Wow.
To a first approximation. I mean, many of the founders of the sort of deep learning revolution either joined companies or have significant industry connections. I don't think there's been any analogy to this ever before, where the talent is so in demand that there's just this incredible updraft that's just pulling people out of academia. Part of the reason we founded the MIT IBM lab was specifically because we didn't want to extract and hollow out academia. We wanted to form a stable hybrid where academia could benefit from the resources of industry. One thing I should say about deep learning in particular, in many cases, academic labs don't even have the resources to reproduce some of the results that are being produced by industrial labs. They just simply don't have enough computers, enough GPUs, which are the processors that drive this. So partnering, going to industry is attractive because you have access to the resources you need, and then partnering with industry is also attractive because then you can at least leverage those resources. So I think the labor dynamics are different than any field before. I think anyone who raised their hand and said their company was trying to figure out AI knows how hard it is to get the best AI talent.
Right.
And that's true for us in industry, and that's also true in academia.
So since both of you geographically are here, I'm from Chicago in the Midwest, but I can ask this question. Do you think that there's an advantage or some differentiation to being in this market with the talent that you have immediate access to, and what's the impact of that?
So absolutely yes,
Yeah.
and then that's a firm yes. I think what is particularly unique about the East Coast is that we have a concentration, while AI talent and machine learning talent is in shortage. In fact, I think you will be hard-pressed to find someone older than 40 that has gotten any kind of truly formal training. That is about to change with MIT and the $1 billion that, and the new college that has just been announced. But within a world of shortage of AI talent, we have a disproportionately high concentration in the East Coast, and particularly sort of all along the corridor, starting with MIT all the way to Carnegie Mellon. Part of it comes from a history of robotics and high concentration in robotics. Robotics and AI are very different things, but there is some level of AI. And part of it is sort of what the legacy that has happened here. Not to say that Andrew Ng and other people in other parts of the country haven't made fundamental contributions,
Right.
or even Toronto and Montreal, but the Northern Corridor, there's quite a bit of interesting resources, and we are less prone to having the Googles of the world and the Ubers of the world poach researchers and academics as proactively, and thank goodness for their intellectual curiosity, because they don't always go for the highest paying check.
Yeah.
Yeah,
agree.
I think universities are the lifeblood of any technological field, and because there's such a pinch for talent, companies are just getting closer and closer and closer. So, Boston, New York, Toronto, Montreal, San Francisco, it's very hard to find talent outside of those areas. I think Boston's in many ways unique. I mean, we have such a concentration. People are here, as much as there was a joke about how great the weather is all year round. The weather isn't great all year round. If you're here because you want to be here. You're buying into that sort of belief in the intellectual environment here, and I think that's very powerful for AI. I think Boston's under-tapped, actually, for AI talent. I think one of the problems with Silicon Valley has wonderful AI talent, but there's fierce competition for it. There's fierce competition here, too, but I think it's at some level, I think there's a lot more we can do, and the community is growing very, very fast.
Wow. So we have just about 5 minutes left, and I'm wanting to open this up to the group of you, because I'm certain there's some good questions for our guests. So we have a mic. Question up here.
Thank you. David, I think about the academic work as being the template or the model. And I then think about the parallels between AI and Internet of Things. And as we started to move down the Internet of Things, what it seemed, at least to me, apparent was that an Internet of Things was sort of this amorphous concept that you kind of understood what the building blocks were, but it was only through the application that it started to have value. And I see AI sort of in that same way. The theoretical model the mapping that you laid out for what IBM Watson's doing is an interesting framework, but it's really in the application and the driving it down into the product where I think the value comes. And I wonder if this whole notion of talent flight to the smaller companies that are developing real product off of the framework is in fact because everybody sort of recognizes that there's this overarching framework but needs to have much more touch points with the reality of the world to actually embody the technology in some kind of useful instantiation.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so IBM has literally hundreds of customers, basically in every industry, so banking, media, you name it, a huge fraction of the world's computing goes through IBM infrastructure. So it's interesting. We have an interesting perspective on the problems that, the actual real problems that our customers have across a broad range of things. And I think that's actually really valuable. I think that's one of the reasons why doing research with academia is so powerful in that frame, because the problem that academics often have is they want to have impact, but oftentimes it's hard to get to that application. So one reason why academic industrial partnerships I think are so powerful is that we can give exposure of researchers to real problems. And we're very much focused on in my lab, we're very focused on what are the problems that are inhibiting getting AI into more places and more industries. Now, before I joined IBM, I had a number of startups. Actually, Rudy, I don't know if you funded any of them or not. But I don't know if you're in the cap table, but we had a few. And it was interesting. So we launched a bunch of, we had about 4 or 5 startups that ended up coming out of the lab. And one of the interesting things about startups was I always knew that they were going to be successful when they jettisoned all of the fancy new stuff. So there's a constant flow of cool new ideas, and literally daily there's something called archive, where people post the latest research, the latest cool idea in AI. And that stuff is great, but it takes a little bit of time for that to winnow out and find out which ones really stick and which ones were just kind of a fancy thing that was sort of a passing fad. And in many cases, what a startup needs to do is really focus on the application and the application only, and just do what it takes. And that usually means backing off, taking the last checkpoint that was good, wholesome, it just gets the job done, even if it's limited in many ways, like you just need to collect a lot of data. Oftentimes that's what needs to happen. So there's this interesting trade-off between academia looking at the fringes and trying to innovate and think about what's coming 5 years out, 10 years out, versus startups where there's a huge amount of excitement, but they're very, very focused on a particular application and just about taking what's already here and pushing it into that mode. So I think that trade-off is really interesting. I think having the full ecosystem is really important, and there's lots of different parts of it that are valuable.
And I would say there is pressure on large incumbents to contribute a lot to the open source community. In fact, perhaps another facet that we've not seen before is whatever innovation is happening in academia, papers already get pushed, but I've never seen this level of pressure on the IBMs and the Googles of the world. In fact, Google has oftentimes been held accountable for not contributing as much. So at this day and age, as we move forward, especially around the application layer, which is where we do, you are right, where we do see most advances, in part because AI the joke was if it couldn't be done, you called it AI. If it could be done, you called it software. So so what's happening is the advantage truly comes from the data, because the algorithms, at least coming out of the lab form, and there is a big gap between what gets done in the lab and what works in the real world, are getting pushed out in the open source community more than we've ever seen with any kind of tech. Data is a whole different ballgame.
I'm going to can I have time for more questions? One more question. I know there's a good one somewhere. Do you see? Uh-oh, am I allowed? Oh, Mark, okay. I'm like, am I allowed to call on you, Nick? Right here.
One of the areas, a subset of AI and a confluence with CRM, is the area of conversational intelligence, which is hot because of chatbots and call centers. Can you comment on how far out the opportunity is for actually instilling AI into conversational intelligence?
So chatbots have largely been a failure. How's that for a statement? In part, not because it's, in my view, an AI or training capability or training of the model and through the data set barrier, but just in the way that they have been deployed, just in the way that brands and e-commerce players have underestimated our expectations as consumers and how we interact with our platform specifically. We are seeing what I would call the beginning of voice, completely bypassing chatbots. We're seeing voice emerge in the form of Alexa, Google Home, especially for what I would call commodity products, reorder the toothpaste, that sort of thing. And we're only seeing the early days around e-commerce. You have players like Vui out of Boston, Voices out of Boston and Ireland, that are developing voice in a much more social and human way. In fact, if anybody's interested in social AI, Cynthia Brazil out of the MIT Media Lab does quite a bit of work around social robotics and social AI, but to make it a lot more human-like interaction, even though there are still guardrails about how much you can say back and forth. The models are pretty well worked out. It's the use cases that were fumbled around chatbots, so they really didn't deliver on what we promised. Voice seems to be the next thing that's truly just bypassing and undermining anything that was going on around bots. And if you look at, Erica around Bank of America, Starbucks, has its voice capabilities. A lot of them, Bank of America, I understand, spent 2 years developing Erica and 100 developers. So there are real dollars going behind voice. It's just a matter of when, not a matter of if.
Yeah, and we're seeing it across all industries. Everybody's got their own chatbot project within lots of different companies. And I think the key thing is meeting the application where the technology is today. Like, how can you make money with the technology in its current state, being honest about what the technology can do, not having unrealistic expectations, and figuring out how you can save money or make money while the technology matures and we have more significant understanding abilities.
Great. Well, I am going to wrap it. Radina, David, thank you so much. And thanks to all of you.